Alonzo Williams stood in the biting chill of early morning Atlanta, his oversized hoodie pulled tightly around his thin frame, the cuffs swallowing his small hands. The line outside the Civic Center snaked like a restless dragon, anxious, eager, jittery with big dreams and shaky knees. Most of the kids in the line were older, some with gleaming sneakers and polished parents at their side, adjusting hair, patting shoulders, whispering affirmations. But Alonzo stood alone, his breath shallow, warm fog spilling out into the cold air like silent prayers. In one hand, he held a wrinkled paper cup of cocoa that had long gone cold, in the other, the strap of his ragged backpack, the one with the patch that read, "Mom's Hope," scribbled in faded Sharpie. He'd arrived before sunrise, hours before the gates even opened. He didn't have vocal coaches or costumes or glossy headshots tucked in folders. What he had was a voice, raw and full of truth, and a desperate reason to use it. His mama was dying. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, unless she got the surgery. And surgery cost money. Money they didn't have. Not from the diner she worked at. Not from their church raffles. Not even from all those weekends Alonzo spent singing outside subway stations with his best friend Jalen, collecting coins from passing strangers who barely looked them in the eye. He glanced up at the bold letters on the towering banner above the auditorium doors, "Voices of Tomorrow, National Youth Talent Showcase, Grand Prize, $100,000 plus medical sponsorship." It might as well have said, "Salvation, this way." Alonzo bit his bottom lip until it stung. He wasn't supposed to be here. A 12-year-old with no formal training and nothing but pain fueling his lungs. But he was here. And he wasn't leaving without a fight. The line shuffled forward, a few feet closer to the doors, the dream. He could hear someone ahead warming up with riffs that bounced off the concrete walls. Someone else dropped a portable speaker and started humming along to a Beyoncé instrumental. Alonzo didn't sing. Not yet. He wanted to save it. Protect it. He wasn't here to impress them with flair or tricks. He was here to tell the truth the only way he knew how, through melody and memory. Behind him, Jalen jogged back into line, breathing hard, 2 breakfast sandwiches clutched in his hands. "They only had sausage left," he said, holding one out. Alonzo shook his head, stomach knotted. Jalen didn't press. He peeled the foil from his sandwich, took a bite, then bumped Alonzo's arm with his elbow. "You got this, little bro. You really do." Alonzo forced a smile. Jalen was more than just his neighbor, he was his shadow, his protector, the one person in the world who saw him as something more than a sad statistic. "Thanks," Alonzo mumbled, his voice barely audible over the chattering crowd. "You think she's watching?" Jalen didn't answer right away. He looked up toward the glowing horizon, where the clouds were just starting to catch fire with sunrise. "She's watching," he said finally. "She's always watching." Alonzo nodded. He had to believe that. He had to believe his mama, hooked up to wires and monitors in Grady Hospital, was still strong enough to keep fighting. But each day, her smile got smaller. Each breath more fragile. Last night, her voice was a rasp when she pressed his hand and whispered, "Sing for me, baby. Just sing." Inside the building, the stage crew moved with urgency, checking cables, adjusting spotlights, wiping down microphones. Judges reviewed their notes, clipboards already filling with crossed-out names. At the center of the long table sat a man in a sharp gray blazer and wire-rimmed glasses, Judge Marcus King, a former R&B vocalist turned attorney turned civic figure. He wasn't usually one for talent shows, but this one had called to him. Something about the format, the cause, the strange ache he couldn't name that pulled him to sign on as a guest judge and prize donor. He didn't smile easily. His eyes were the kind that held 1,000 regrets behind them. He glanced down at the contestant list without really reading. Just a blur of names. He had no idea that one of those names belonged to the son he'd never met. Alonzo's hands were sweating as he stepped closer to the check-in table. The woman there gave him a kind look. "You here by yourself, sweetheart?" she asked, noticing the absence of any adult nearby. He nodded. "Mama's in the hospital," he said. She hesitated, then checked his form, stamped his wristband, and gave him a soft smile that was full of things she didn't say. In the green room, kids were stretching, practicing, posing. Alonzo sat in the corner, backpack on his lap, humming under his breath. The hum turned into a whisper of a melody, something he'd written just for today, just for her. He didn't have a title. Just a line, "Hold on, Mama. Don't let go." The notes trembled like his fingers, but they were true. Every one of them. Across the room, another boy with slicked hair sneered. "Is that the subway kid? I saw him online. Thought this was a real competition." Alonzo looked away. Jalen would have snapped back, but Jalen wasn't here. It was just him now. Finally, his number was called. 145, Alonzo Williams. 12 years old. Original composition. He walked the hallway like it was a tunnel with no end, his footsteps soft but certain. When he stepped into the blinding lights of the stage, his breath caught. The theater stretched out in every direction, huge, intimidating, silent. The judges barely looked up. "Name and age, please," the woman in the middle asked, barely glancing at him. "Alonzo Williams. I'm 12. His voice echoed through the mic, small but steady. "And what will you be singing?" He swallowed hard. "A song I wrote. For my mom." There was a pause. One judge raised an eyebrow. The man in the gray blazer slowly lifted his gaze. Alonzo didn't wait for permission. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and let it begin. The first note was soft, barely more than a whisper. But it held. It carried. It grew. The lyrics unfolded not like a performance, but like a plea. "Hold on, Mama. I know it's hard. But I found a place that hears my heart. Don't close your eyes. Not just yet. I'm singing loud so you don't forget." His voice cracked once, just once, but it didn't break. It bent like a tree in wind, then stood tall again. The theater was frozen, time pausing in the space between words. And somewhere in the audience, something shifted in Marcus King's chest. His pen slipped from his hand. When the song ended, there was a long silence. Then a wave of applause began, not thunderous, but real. The kind of clapping that comes from the gut, not politeness. And Alonzo didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, quietly, and whispered to the mic like he was speaking only to her, "I love you, Mama. I'm coming home with more than a song." As he turned and walked off the stage, the man in the gray blazer leaned forward, squinting after him. His throat was tight. His eyes narrowed. He didn't know why. Not yet. But something in that boy's voice had echoed from somewhere deep inside his own past. The bus ride home was quiet, the kind of quiet that wrapped itself around your shoulders like an old blanket, warm and worn but heavy. Alonzo sat in the very back, his cheek resting against the window, his breath fogging up the glass as the city passed in blurred streaks of gray and gold. The weight of what had just happened on stage hadn't hit him yet. It floated above him like a balloon he was afraid to reach for, in case it popped and reminded him he was still just a kid from the South Side whose mom was sick and whose future had always felt like a door locked from the outside. He didn't know what the judges thought. He didn't know if the camera caught the tears he fought back or the way his voice cracked near the bridge. But he knew how he felt. And how he felt was, lighter. Like just singing those words out loud had done something. Not fixed anything. But maybe Lohe slipped into the room, careful not to wake her, and sat in the chair beside her bed. His eyes moved to the photo on the nightstand, one of the few she'd never put away. It was old and faded, creased down the middle. A younger version of his mama smiled back at him, bright and radiant, standing beside a man with a crooked grin and warm eyes. Alonzo had studied that picture more times than he could count, tracing the lines of the man's face, wondering how someone who looked so kind could leave so easily. Asen the knots in his chest. Just a little. By the time the bus pulled into his stop, the sun had dropped low behind the row of tired apartment buildings. He stepped off with his backpack bouncing against his back and his heart thudding harder with each step closer to home. Home wasn't much. Just a one-bedroom on the third floor, chipped paint on the railings, a squeaky door that never fully shut. But it was where his mama was. And that made it sacred. He pushed open the apartment door and was met with silence, no TV, no music, just the soft beep of the oxygen machine in the bedroom. Alonzo dropped his bag by the couch and tiptoed down the hall. The bedroom door was cracked open, and he peeked in. His mama was asleep, her chest rising slowly under the blanket, her face pale but peaceful. The room was dim, lit only by the low glow of the street lamp outside leaking through the blinds. A gospel song played faintly from the old stereo near her bed. Mahalia Jackson. Alonzo smiled. That was her favorite. He looked like him. That's what people always said. The same eyes, same nose, same slightly too big ears. But his mama never said much about him. Anytime he asked, she'd deflect, or her voice would grow distant, and she'd just say, he was here. Then he wasn't. That's all, baby. And Alonzo had learned not to push. But lately, something in her voice had changed. Like there was more she wanted to say but didn't know how. Like time was running out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cassette tape. It was old, he'd found it in a dusty box last summer in the back of her closet. The label had faded, but he could still read it, LM+MK // first take. He'd asked her about it once. She'd taken it from his hand gently, stared at it for a long time, and whispered, that's where it all started. One song. He never asked again. But he made a copy. And tonight, something told him to listen. He slipped the tape into her old stereo deck, careful not to disturb her, and pressed play. The sound crackled to life, old and scratchy, but beneath the static came two voices, young, vibrant, laughing. Then a piano chord. And then singing. It was her. His mama. Young, alive, her voice rich and honey-smooth, pouring through the room like sunlight through curtains. And then came the male voice, lower, soulful, with a rasp that wrapped around hers like ivy. Together, they blended into something magic. It was a love song, simple and soft. But it was real. You could feel it. Alonzo leaned forward, mesmerized. He didn't know music could feel like this. Like remembering something you never lived through. Then the laughter came again, at the end of the track. His mama's voice, breathless. Marcus, you're off key again. The man laughed. Only 'cause I'm distracted looking at you. Marcus. The name hit him like a cymbal crash. He stared at the tape deck, eyes wide. The initials on the label. M.K. Marcus. King. His chest tightened. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Marcus was a common name. Probably just coincidence. Probably. But now that he thought about it, wasn't the judge at the audition named Marcus King? He grabbed his backpack, pulled out the program from the day's audition, and flipped to the judge profiles. There it was, Marcus King, guest judge. Former singer, now Superior Court Judge of Fulton County. Known for his community outreach and love for soul music. Alonzo sat frozen, tape still spinning in the background. His eyes darted back to the photo. Then to the cassette. Then to the bio in the program. It couldn't be. Could it? Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked. His mama stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She saw him at the stereo and smiled weakly. You listening to that old thing again? She asked, voice hoarse. Alonzo didn't answer right away. His heart was pounding. Mama, he said slowly. Is that him? She blinked. Who? The man singing with you. On the tape. She looked at him for a long moment, the smile fading. She closed her eyes and exhaled, her hand trembling slightly as it reached for the edge of the blanket. Baby, she said softly, it's late. Can we talk tomorrow? He hesitated. Is his name Marcus? Her eyes opened again, sharper now. Wary. Alonzo swallowed. Marcus King. For a moment, the room felt like it stopped breathing. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but something deeper. Regret. She nodded, just once. Alonzo felt the air leave his lungs. I saw him, he said quietly. Today. He was there. One of the judges. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped from the corner of one. I never told him, she whispered. He never knew. Alonzo sat back, stunned. A silence fell between them that felt too big to cross. Then her hand found his. She squeezed it, barely. I didn't want to raise you in confusion, she said. I didn't know if you would care. Or if you'd be safer without him. Alonzo didn't respond. His world had tilted. Everything he thought he knew, about her, about himself, had changed in the space of a name. But all he could think was one thing, does he know now? He sat in the chair, gripping her hand as the tape clicked to an end. The music stopped. The questions didn't. Marcus King hadn't been able to sleep. He tried, God knows he tried. After the auditions, he'd gone home, kicked off his shoes, poured a glass of bourbon, and sat in his leather chair staring out the window of his downtown condo. The city buzzed below him, cars weaving through streetlights, neon signs flickering, sirens echoing faintly in the distance, but his mind was stuck on one voice. That boy. Alonzo. There had been dozens of kids that day. Some sang like angels, others like they were still learning how to hold a note. But that one boy. The skinny kid with the tired eyes and old soul voice, he had something none of the others did. It wasn't just talent. It was something deeper. Something that tugged at Marcus in a way he hadn't felt in decades. The way the boy said, "This is for my mama," with no performance in his tone, just truth. The way his voice cracked on that one line but kept going. Like breaking didn't mean quitting. Marcus hadn't taken his eyes off him the entire time. And afterward, when the applause died down and the judges shuffled their papers, pretending not to be moved, Marcus couldn't. He found himself still staring at the stage long after the boy had disappeared into the wings. Now, hours later, long past midnight, Marcus opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a faded envelope. Inside the envelope, a photograph, creases like lightning bolts across its surface. Lisa. She was laughing in the photo, head thrown back, her hand resting on his chest. He looked younger then. His smile unguarded, his eyes softer. He traced her face with his finger. The past came rushing in like a storm. Lisa Marie Williams. He hadn't said that name aloud in years. They met the summer after his college graduation, two kids with voices and big dreams. They sang together at open mics, weddings, even recorded a few demos. She had fire in her. Not the kind that burns fast and fades, but the kind that glows slow and steady, like embers that never die. They had one summer. One damn summer. Then life happened. Law school. Expectations. His father got sick. He moved. She stayed. They wrote letters for a while. Then the letters stopped. He never knew why. He figured she'd moved on, like people do. He told himself not to chase what had already let him go. But now, sitting here, the voice of that boy ringing in his ears, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt. He took a sip of bourbon and stared at the photograph. Could it be? Was that boy? He shook his head, trying to shake the thought. But it was already rooted. There had been something about the shape of the boy's mouth. The way his eyes darted nervously before he sang. The way his hands clenched when he was scared. It was like watching a memory walk across the stage. He stood up suddenly, heart pounding. He needed answers. The next morning, Marcus didn't go to court. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule, threw on a coat, and drove to the civic center. The auditions were over, the stage already packed away, the banners taken down. But he wasn't there for the stage. He was there for the paperwork. He flashed his badge at the event coordinator, something he hadn't done in years. He didn't like pulling rank, but this wasn't about influence. This was personal. "I need the file on contestant number 145, he said. "Alonzo Williams." The coordinator blinked at him. Sir, that's confidential information. Parental release forms, contact details, we're not authorized." "I'm not asking for publicity rights," Marcus interrupted, voice firm. "I'm asking for a name. A parent or guardian. That's all." The coordinator hesitated, then sighed, flipping through a folder on the desk. "We don't have much. Just this." She handed over a copy of the contestant intake sheet. Name, Alonzo Elijah Williams. Age, 12. Emergency contact, Lisa M. Williams, mother. Marcus felt the paper tremble in his hands. Lisa. It was her. It was really her. His throat tightened. The page listed an address, a Southside zip code. He knew that part of town. Poorly funded, mostly ignored, half of it still recovering from the last recession. He remembered Lisa once telling him she'd never leave Atlanta. That she had roots too deep. He'd laughed at the time, promising he'd drag her to New York or Chicago the moment they made it big. He never did. He stood there in the lobby, everything around him a blur. Noise faded. Motion blurred. All that remained was a name and an address. Alonzo Williams. His son. He didn't remember the drive. 1 minute he was in Midtown, the next he was parked outside a crumbling apartment complex with rusted railings and a cracked sidewalk. He didn't know what he was expecting. A big dramatic reunion. A door slamming in his face. Maybe both. He climbed the stairs slowly, heart thundering in his chest. He found the door, 3B, and raised his hand to knock. But he didn't. He stood there, fist hovering, listening. Through the thin wood, he could hear music. A soft humming. A boy's voice. Alonzo. Singing something simple. Something pure. Marcus lowered his hand. He wasn't ready. He turned and walked back down the stairs, head spinning. He needed to think. To figure out how to approach this without destroying whatever fragile balance that boy had left in his life. He couldn't just knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm your father." Surprise. But he also couldn't walk away again. Not this time. Back inside the apartment, Alonzo stood at the kitchen sink, washing 2 cups, still humming. His mom was resting again, her pain meds finally kicking in. The tape from last night still echoed in his ears. That laugh. That name. Marcus. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop wondering if the man on that judging panel, the man with the serious face and sharp suits, was really the same Marcus from the tape. From the photo. From his blood. He thought about the way the man had looked at him after his performance. Like he knew something. Like he saw something familiar. Alonzo wasn't stupid. He'd learned not to ask for things people didn't want to give. But this was different. If that man was his father, he had a right to know. Not because he needed a dad, but because there were pieces of himself missing, and he was tired of guessing what shape they were supposed to be. He dried the cups and glanced toward the window. He thought he saw someone across the street, a tall figure standing beside a black car, looking up at their building. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the kitchen blinds in long, golden slants. Alonzo sat at the table, a bowl of soggy cereal in front of him, untouched. The spoon in his hand dangled over the bowl like a thought half-finished. Across the hall, his mama stirred in her bed, letting out a soft groan as the oxygen machine hummed and clicked beside her. The world outside moved like it always did, cars honking, radios blaring, someone arguing 2 floors down, but inside their apartment, time felt stuck. Like everything had paused, waiting for him to make sense of the question that had lodged itself deep in his chest. He kept staring at the photograph on the fridge, held up by a cracked butterfly magnet. The same old picture, his mom and that man, Marcus. Back then, it had just been a photo of a stranger. Now it felt like a puzzle piece with jagged edges, trying to fit into a space he didn't know existed. "Mama," he called softly. Her voice came out hoarse from down the hall. "Mornin', baby." He walked into her room slowly, feeling like he was walking into a memory. She was propped up on pillows, her scarf wrapped tight around her head, dark circles beneath her eyes that never seemed to fade. But when she looked at him, she still smiled like nothing was wrong. Like love could be stronger than tumors and blood reports. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "Better than yesterday," she said, trying to sit up straighter, though her hand trembled. "Your singing always helps me rest." Alonzo sat beside her bed and fidgeted with the hem of the blanket. I listened to the tape again last night." She paused. Her smile faded just a little. "The one with me and him?" He nodded. "Mama, why didn't you ever tell me about him?" She looked away. The light from the blind striped her face, like bars across a window. "Because it was complicated," she said finally. Alonzo's voice was quiet, but firm. "Is he my father?" Silence. Just the beep of the machine. Then she turned back to him, eyes glassy. "Yes." The word hung in the air like smoke. He felt it settle over him, heavy, confusing, but somehow, real. "His name's Marcus King, right?" he asked, heart pounding. She closed her eyes and nodded again. Alonzo stood up and started pacing. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you tell him?" "I was scared," she whispered. "Back then. I didn't know what kind of man he'd become. And once I found out he had gone into law school, and you came along, I just wanted to protect you." "From what?" Alonzo's voice cracked. "From him? Or from me ever asking questions?" Her eyes welled with tears. "From disappointment," she said. "From heartbreak. From knowing your father left before he even knew you existed." Alonzo sat down hard, breath shallow. He felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. She reached for his hand. "It wasn't because I didn't love him. I did. He was my whole world, once. But the world doesn't always let love be enough. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to yell. But when he looked at her, so small beneath the covers, every sharp word in his chest melted. This was still his mama. The one who raised him with warmth even when the gas got cut off. The one who sang lullabies on nights the pain got too loud. She had always given him everything she could. Still, the ache didn't go away. He needed answers. And not just from her. Later that afternoon, after he made her some toast and checked her pills, Alonzo tucked his phone and the old photo into his backpack and slipped out of the apartment. He didn't go to school. He didn't go to the church or the library. He went to Ms. Ruby. Ms. Ruby ran the hair salon on the corner, just below the cracked mural of Dr. King that faded more every year. She'd known his mama since they were teenagers, back when the neighborhood still had corner stores that stayed open past dark. Ruby wasn't just a hairdresser. She was the unofficial historian of the block. If something had happened within 5 city blocks in the past 30 years, she knew about it. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped in, the smell of pressing oil and incense thick in the air. A woman was under the dryer, flipping through a magazine. Ruby was wiping down her station, her big gold hoop earrings catching the light. "Well, look what the wind blew in," she said, raising an eyebrow at Alonzo. "What brings you here, sugar? You finally decide to let me fix that crooked part in your hair?" He gave a weak smile and held up the photo. "You remember him?" Ruby's eyes narrowed. She took the photo gently, turned it in her hand. Marcus King," she said. "Lord, I haven't thought about him in a long time." "So it's true?" Alonzo asked. "That's really him?" "Sure is," she said. "He used to come around back in the day. Always with that guitar and a smile that made every girl lose her mind. But he was different with your mama. Real different. They were tight." "What happened?" Alonzo pressed. Ruby sighed, sat down in her chair. "He left. Got accepted into law school. Lisa didn't go with him. Said Atlanta was her home. Said she had roots too deep. Next thing we knew, he was gone. She stayed. Quietly started showing, had you a few months later. I asked her if she told him, and she just shook her head." Alonzo's heart dropped. She never even tried. She said she didn't want him to feel trapped. That if he wanted to know, he would have called. Wrote. Something. Alonzo sat down, his legs suddenly weak. "You think he would have stayed if he knew?" he whispered. Ruby looked at him for a long time. "I don't know, baby. People change. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. All I know is your mama raised you into a good boy without him. That counts for something." He nodded, still staring at the photo. "But," Ruby added, "if he's back now, and if you really want to know who he is today, maybe it's time you ask him." Alonzo walked home slowly, the sun dipping low behind the buildings. The photo burned in his pocket like a secret he was tired of carrying. His steps felt heavier, like every question pulled at his shoes. When he got to their floor, he paused before opening the door. Inside, the apartment smelled like soup. His mama had found the strength to cook again. That gave him comfort. But what gave him pause was something else. On the welcome mat was a small envelope, no name on the front, just taped shut. He looked around the hall. No one. He picked it up, heart pounding, and tore it open. Inside, a folded note. One sentence. "You sang like someone I used to know. MK." His breath caught. He looked back down the hallway. Empty. But he knew now. Marcus King had been here. Alonzo couldn't sleep that night. He kept turning the envelope over in his hand, reading that single line again and again, "You sang like someone I used to know. MK." The words were short, simple, but they echoed like thunder in his chest. He read it until the letters blurred. He folded it neatly, slid it under his mattress like it might disappear if he didn't hold on to it. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of the streetlight slipping through the window. His mama was asleep again, her shallow breath steady, but labored. The oxygen machine beeped like a heartbeat beside her bed. Alonzo stood quietly in the hallway, afraid to move too loudly. Afraid she might wake up and see how shaken he was. He walked back into the living room, pulled the old family photo album off the shelf, and flipped it open. There weren't many pictures of his mom and Marcus together, just 3, maybe 4, and in none of them were they touching. No arms around each other, no kisses on cheeks. But the way they looked at each other told a different story. Like they were holding something more important than physical closeness. Like they were holding dreams. He stopped on a page near the end. A hospital wristband taped to the paper. A smudged sonogram. A note scribbled in faded pen, Alonzo Elijah, 6 pounds 3 ounces, my reason to fight. He touched the words gently, then closed the album. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Alonzo stood outside the county courthouse. It looked even taller up close, all glass and stone and the weight of decisions made inside. He clutched his backpack, heart thudding against his ribs. He didn't know what he was doing here exactly. He just knew that waiting for someone else to fix the silence wasn't working. He walked up the steps, through the front doors, and past the metal detector. A guard gave him a curious look, but Alonzo just nodded politely and kept walking like he belonged. He didn't know where to find Marcus King. He didn't even know if the man would be in court that day. But the secretary at the front desk directed him to the 3rd floor, family court. That felt fitting. He stood outside courtroom 3A, listening through the heavy oak doors to the muffled voice of a judge speaking. He knew that voice. Marcus King. The man who had been a song on a cassette. A name in a photo. A ghost. Now he was real. Just a few feet away. Alonzo's palms were sweaty. He gripped the photo of his mother and Marcus, folded in his jacket pocket, the edges soft from how often he'd held it. He waited. When the doors finally opened, lawyers spilled out first, then a woman crying into a tissue, her lawyer's hand on her back. A few more people trickled out behind her. And then, Marcus. He stepped into the hallway in a dark blue suit, briefcase in hand, talking to a clerk. He looked tired, like the weight of years sat behind his eyes. He didn't see Alonzo at first. But Alonzo saw him. He took a step forward. Then another. His throat was dry. Judge King, he said, voice just above a whisper. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. He turned. And for a moment, his face was unreadable. Then recognition flickered. Alonzo. He said the name like it was something fragile. Something he was afraid to break by saying it too loud. Alonzo nodded, nerves buzzing. I got your note, he said. Marcus hesitated, then gestured down the hallway. Let's talk somewhere quiet. They ended up on a bench in the back courtyard behind the courthouse. The city was waking up around them, traffic starting, birds calling, but in that moment, it felt like a separate world. I didn't know, Marcus said after a long silence. Your mother never told me. I figured, Alonzo said, his voice low. But you know now. Marcus looked at him carefully. And what do you want to do with that? Alonzo shrugged. I don't know. I didn't come here to make a scene. I just wanted to see you. For real. Not on stage. Not in a photograph. They sat in silence for a few beats. Marcus ran a hand over his face. You're a good singer, he said. You sang like Lisa. Like she used to when she believed the world could be healed with melody. Alonzo's voice cracked a little. She still believes that. Even now. Marcus's jaw tightened. Is she okay? No, Alonzo said simply. She's dying. The words landed like bricks. Marcus stared at the ground. God. She's been sick for a while. I'm trying to win the audition because the prize is $10,000. Enough to cover treatment she can't afford. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together. I'm sorry, Alonzo. I didn't know. I didn't expect you to, Alonzo said. But now you do. So I guess the question is, what happens next? Marcus looked at him, really looked at him, like he was trying to memorize every inch of his son's face in case it disappeared again. I want to help, he said. I want to be part of your life. But I also know I don't have the right to just walk in like the last 13 years didn't happen. Alonzo's lip trembled. I don't know if I want anything from you. I just wanted to know if you were real. If you were more than a name my mom never said. Marcus nodded. I am. I was. And I'm sorry I wasn't there when it mattered. They sat there for a long time, the space between them slowly shrinking. Not through promises or apologies, but through shared silence. Finally, Alonzo reached into his backpack and handed Marcus the photo. She kept this, he said. She never threw it away. Even when she couldn't look at it. Marcus took the photo with shaking hands. He stared at it like it might dissolve. His eyes reddened. She looks just like I remember, he whispered. And you look like both of us. I know, Alonzo said quietly. Another long pause. Then Marcus cleared his throat. Let me help with the hospital bills. At least that. I don't want your money, Alonzo said. Not like that. Then let me earn the right to help, Marcus said, his voice firm now. Come to dinner with me. Just once. You pick the place. No pressure. No big speeches. Just, two people trying to understand what life gave them. Alonzo hesitated. Okay. One dinner. Marcus nodded, the smallest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. As they stood up, Alonzo turned to him. Were you ever going to come back for her? If you had known. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked toward the skyline. I don't know, he said. But I think about her every time I hear someone sing like she used to. Alonzo walked away slowly, heart heavier than before, but not in a bad way. It was the weight of something beginning, not healing, not forgiveness, not yet, but something real. And real was enough, for now. The day of the competition arrived too quickly. Alonzo stood in front of the mirror, smoothing his t-shirt and adjusting the worn-out jacket he wore, which was more familiar than any prize or designer piece of clothing could ever be. He glanced over at his mother's bed. She was asleep again, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that made him wish time could freeze. He had promised her that he would do his best, that everything would be okay, but he wasn't sure anymore. For the first time, he wasn't just singing for a chance to save her. He was singing for a part of himself that had been missing, his father. Marcus. The envelope with Marcus's note was tucked into his bag, pressed flat between the pages of a journal. He hadn't heard from Marcus since that afternoon in the courthouse, but it didn't matter. Marcus had made it clear that he wanted to be part of Alonzo's life now, but Alonzo wasn't sure if he could trust that. Not yet. The competition was being held in a huge auditorium downtown, a place that had seen hundreds of hopeful contestants step onto the stage, each one eager for their moment in the spotlight. But for Alonzo, the spotlight felt more like a trap. As he walked into the venue, the hum of excited voices and the noise of the audience made him feel like he was walking into a storm. Everywhere he looked, there were people. Contestants pacing, vocal coaches running through scales with their clients, judges seated behind long tables. And the pressure, God, the pressure, was starting to crush him. He saw familiar faces in the crowd, friends from school, but they didn't smile at him the way they usually did. There were whispers, eyes that lingered a little too long. People knew. They knew about his mother's illness, they knew about his talent, and, now, they knew about Marcus King. The infamous judge who had come out of nowhere to reconnect with his estranged son. Alonzo wasn't sure if the attention felt more like a curse or a blessing. In a way, he was grateful that the whispers kept his focus sharp, but every moment of it also felt like a weight around his neck. As he found his seat in the waiting area, a girl around his age, maybe a little older, slid into the chair next to him. She was tall, with bright eyes that seemed to see everything. Her fingers were twirling the end of her hair nervously, and she was looking at him in a way that felt almost too interested. Hey, she said softly, offering a tight smile. You're Alonzo, right? He nodded, unsure of how to answer. She had the air of someone who was used to people knowing her name. A quiet confidence, mixed with an underlying tension. Alonso didn't think he had that, at least, not today. I saw you singing in the church choir last month, she continued, not waiting for him to speak. You were amazing. Thanks, he said, his voice rough. She hesitated before asking, are you nervous? Yeah, a little. I heard your dad's Marcus King, she said, her words careful, as if testing the waters. That's a big deal. You must be under a lot of pressure. Alonso tensed at the mention of Marcus. He didn't know how to explain the complexity of what was happening between them. He didn't even fully understand it himself. Yeah, well, pressure comes with the territory, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. But I'm not here because of him. The girl raised an eyebrow, studying him. You're here because of you, then? Exactly, Alonso replied, though part of him wasn't sure what that meant. Was he really doing this for himself? Or was he just trying to hold on to a part of his life that seemed to be slipping away every day? You don't seem like the type who gets caught up in the drama, she said, her voice softer now. But I can already see it in your eyes. People are talking. And it's not just about your singing. He nodded, his stomach tightening. People weren't just talking about his talent. They were talking about his father. And, to be honest, he didn't know what hurt more, the whispers or the fact that he couldn't answer their questions. Because he didn't have answers, only more questions. The girl's gaze softened. You're not the only one feeling this way. A lot of us have something we're fighting for, something personal, you know. Alonso nodded again, not sure if she understood, but grateful for the way her words made him feel less isolated. I guess it's just harder to fight when you don't know if the thing you're fighting for is even worth it. She was silent for a moment, and then she gave him a knowing look. You don't have to fight alone, Alonso. Before he could respond, his name was called. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. His hands were clammy, but as he made his way toward the stage, he could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. They knew about his mother's illness. They knew about his father. And now, they would know if he could sing. It felt like walking toward a cliff, the world below him spinning out of control, but he didn't have a choice. He had to jump. The stage was bright, the spotlight blinding as he stepped into the center. There was a microphone in front of him, and the judges, 3 of them, sat in front of him, silent, waiting. And at the center of it all, Marcus King sat with his hands folded on the table. His eyes locked with Alonso's, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Alonso's throat closed up. This was the man he had been searching for, the man whose presence had haunted him since that day in the courthouse. He was no longer a name in an envelope. He was right there, in front of him, watching him. Expecting something. Alonso swallowed hard, shaking off the nerves that threatened to overwhelm him. He couldn't back down. Not now. He had to sing. He had to prove that he was more than the whispers, more than the rumors. He took a deep breath and began. His voice filled the auditorium, steady at first, then growing stronger as the melody took hold. The words that spoke of hope, loss, and the strength to keep going, poured out of him. For a moment, he forgot about Marcus. He forgot about the judges. He forgot about the whispers and the pressure. It was just him and the song. But when he finished, there was no applause, no immediate reaction. Only silence. The kind of silence that made the weight of every expectation feel heavier than before. Marcus stood up first. His face was unreadable, but Alonso saw the flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe pride, before he spoke. You have a voice, he said quietly. But do you know who you are when you sing? Alonso's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure how to answer that. All he knew was that, for the first time in his life, he was singing for something bigger than himself. Marcus stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Alonso's. "We'll talk later. But remember this, no matter how far you run, the truth always finds you." Alonso nodded, trying to calm the storm inside him. But in that moment, he realized that the real battle wasn't just about winning the competition, it was about facing the truth that was waiting for him. Alonso couldn't escape the silence. The words Marcus had spoken after his performance haunted him like a shadow that wouldn't let go. "Do you know who you are when you sing?" The question echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wasn't just talking about his talent. As he walked off the stage, his heart was still racing, but the adrenaline had started to wear off, replaced by an unease he couldn't name. He had done his best. He had sung from a place deeper than he thought he could reach, but now it felt like there was something more, a deeper question, a harder truth he wasn't ready to face. The competition was far from over, but in that moment, it felt as if everything else had faded away. There were other contestants, other voices, but none of them seemed to matter. Not to him. Not today. Alonso slipped into a quiet corner backstage, his breath still uneven. He tried to steady himself, but the eyes of the other contestants followed him, some with curiosity, some with judgment. He knew what they were thinking. They knew about his mother. They knew about Marcus. And now, they knew about him. The boy who had the talent, the boy who had a father who was a judge who hadn't been there for him. He hated that everyone knew. He hated that the whispers followed him, that they painted him as something he didn't fully understand yet. A part of him wanted to run, to leave the auditorium, to escape to the small world he'd known before Marcus had reappeared. But he couldn't. He had come too far. The door opened behind him, and Alonso didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You did good out there," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made Alonso's stomach flip. He still didn't know how to feel about Marcus. Part of him wanted to believe that the man had truly changed, that he was here to help, to be part of Alonso's life in a real way. But another part of him wondered if it was all just a game, a way for Marcus to redeem himself in the eyes of the public, to somehow fix the mistakes of the past without actually fixing anything. Alonso turned to face him, his expression hard. "Did I?" he asked, his voice almost sarcastic. "You don't get to say that. Not after all these years." Marcus took a step forward, his eyes softening. "I know I don't have the right to say much. But I'm here now. And I'm trying, Alonso. I'm trying to make up for everything I missed." Alonso shook his head. "You can't just show up and think you can fix everything with a couple of nice words. You can't just show up after all this time and expect me to trust you. Trust doesn't come easy." Marcus seemed to take the hit. He took a step back, his face momentarily losing the mask of calm. "I know that. Believe me, I know. But you have to understand something, Alonso. This isn't just about me and you. This is about your mom. She's the reason I'm here. She's the reason I'm trying to do the right thing." Alonso's heart twisted in his chest. "Why didn't you do the right thing when it actually mattered?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't have an answer. He just stood there, watching Alonso like he was trying to find the right words. But the words wouldn't come. And maybe that was the problem, maybe no words could fix what had been broken. Before Alonso could say anything else, the stage manager appeared at the door, calling for Marcus. "Judge King, they need you in the meeting room. They're discussing the scores." Marcus nodded and started to walk away, but then he stopped, his back still turned. "You know where I'll be, Alonso. If you want to talk, if you want to ask questions. I'm here." But Alonso didn't respond. He couldn't. Because the truth was, he didn't know what questions to ask. He didn't know if he could trust Marcus to answer them honestly. And maybe that was the problem, maybe he didn't want to ask the questions. Maybe he just wanted to forget that all of this was happening. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The competition continued, but it felt like Alonso was just going through the motions. Every song, every performance seemed to fade into the background. He couldn't focus. The thought of his mother, his promise to her, kept pulling at him. She was still at home, still fighting, still struggling to breathe. And yet here he was, on a stage, surrounded by people who didn't understand. Who couldn't understand? When the final round of auditions ended, Alonso found himself standing near the back of the auditorium, watching as the judges deliberated. Marcus was seated at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his eyes focused on the papers in front of him. Alonso didn't know if Marcus was thinking about him, or if he was just doing his job. But Alonso couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. After what felt like hours, the judges stood up, and the crowd fell silent. Alonso felt a knot in his stomach as the host took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, his voice carrying across the room, "it's time for the results. After much deliberation, we've narrowed it down to the top 5 performers." Alonso's heart was pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if he wanted to hear his name or if he was terrified of it. "And now," the host continued, in no particular order, "the first contestant moving on to the final round is Alonso King." For a moment, everything stopped. His name echoed in his ears, and his heart stopped in his chest. He blinked, as if trying to process what had just happened. He had made it. He was going to the final round. But as the crowd clapped and cheered, Alonso's eyes found Marcus's. The man's face was unreadable, his expression distant. Alonso couldn't tell if he was proud or just doing his job. Later that night, when Alonso finally returned home, he was met with silence. His mother's bed was still empty. The oxygen machine beeped softly, a constant reminder of how fragile her life had become. Alonso walked into the room, his footsteps slow, his body heavy. He sat down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked so peaceful, so fragile, but he could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had made it to the final round. But what did that even mean? Was it worth it? Was any of it worth it if he couldn't save her? The door creaked open behind him, and he didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Marcus stood there, watching him quietly. Alonso didn't know if he was ready for another conversation, but he couldn't bring himself to turn him away. "I saw you sing," Marcus said, his voice gentle. "You've got something special. But you already know that, don't you?" Alonso didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at his mother's face, wishing he could make all of this disappear. Wishing he could fix everything. "We still have time," Marcus said, his voice breaking the silence. "We still have time to make this right." But Alonso wasn't sure if he could believe that anymore. Alonso sat in his mother's room long after Marcus had left. The evening light filtered softly through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. It had been hours since the competition had ended, but Alonso felt as though he hadn't moved an inch. The adrenaline from the performance had long faded, leaving only the overwhelming silence. He couldn't even remember the applause. He couldn't remember the feeling of his name being called. All he could think about was the quiet beeping of the oxygen machine next to his mother's bed. His mother's illness had been dragging on for so long that Alonso had almost forgotten what it felt like for her to be healthy. Almost forgotten what it felt like to have her awake, laughing, even if only for a moment. Now, with each passing day, the air in the house seemed to grow heavier. Every breath she took, every soft murmur, felt like a reminder that time was running out. And despite everything, despite the competition and the performance, Alonso felt as if nothing he did would be enough to save her. The door creaked open again, and Marcus stepped in, a hesitant figure against the backdrop of the dimly lit room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the weight of everything that had gone unspoken between them had settled in the room like dust. Marcus took a step closer, his gaze fixed on Alonso, who hadn't moved from the chair beside his mother's bed. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, and his shoulders were tense, as though he were carrying a burden he didn't want to acknowledge. "Alonzo," Marcus finally said, his voice quiet. "I don't know what you're thinking right now. I know I've said a lot of things, and none of it has been enough. I'm not here to fix everything in one conversation. I can't. But I can't leave it like this either." Alonzo turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting Marcus's for the first time since the competition. He saw the conflict in Marcus's eyes, the way his mouth tightened as if he were trying to hold something back. But Alonzo wasn't sure what it was, what Marcus was really feeling. "I don't know what to say to you, Marcus," Alonzo replied, his voice flat. "You don't get to just walk in and out of my life whenever you feel like it. You can't just show up now and expect me to be okay with everything that's happened." The words burned, but they felt like a release, like a dam breaking open. Alonzo had been holding them back for so long, waiting for the right moment to speak the truth he had buried deep inside. The truth that he was angry, hurt, and confused. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, his hands hanging at his sides, his face hardening in a way that made Alonzo wonder if he was preparing for another rejection. But then, after a long pause, Marcus stepped closer and sat down at the edge of the bed, his gaze still locked on Alonzo. "I get it," Marcus said, his voice quiet but steady. "I get that you're angry. You have every right to be. I left. I chose to leave, and I hurt you. And I'm sorry. I'll always be sorry for that. But I can't change the past. What I can do is be here now. For you. For your mom. And for whatever future we have left together." Alonzo wanted to scream. He wanted to shout that it was too late, that all the apologies in the world wouldn't undo the years of absence, the missed birthdays, the empty promises. But instead, all he could do was sit there, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Marcus continued, his voice almost pleading now. "I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to make things right. To be part of your life, if you'll let me." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Alonzo could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavier than anything he had ever felt before. It was as if the world had slowed, and all the years of missing his father, of not knowing who he was or where he had gone, had finally come crashing down on him. He glanced at his mother, who was still asleep, her chest rising and falling slowly. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Her presence was a constant, a reminder that the time for questions and doubts was running out. She didn't have the energy to fight, but Alonzo knew she wanted him to. She wanted him to be strong, to make the right decisions, even when he wasn't sure what the right decision was. "I don't know what you want me to say," Alonzo finally whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "I don't know how to trust you again." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression filled with something Alonzo couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps, or sorrow. It was hard to tell. "I'm not asking for trust right away," Marcus replied. "I'm asking for a chance to earn it. One day at a time. But I can't do that if you don't let me in. I can't help if you keep pushing me away." Alonzo didn't respond. He couldn't find the words. What was he supposed to say to that? Could he really let Marcus back into his life after everything that had happened? Could he allow himself to trust a man who had abandoned him and his mother without a second thought? The answer wasn't easy. And as much as he wanted to run from the confusion swirling in his mind, he knew that wasn't an option. Not anymore. "Look," Marcus said, his voice softer now. "I know this is all messed up. I know I can't fix everything in a day. But I promise you, Alonzo, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. And when you're ready to talk, I'll be waiting." Alonzo stared at him, still unsure. He didn't know if he was ready for this. He didn't know if he could open up to Marcus after everything that had happened. But one thing was clear, he couldn't keep running forever. The silence between them was too heavy, the weight of what had been left unsaid was too much to bear. Marcus stood up slowly, his hand resting gently on Alonso's shoulder for a moment before he turned and walked toward the door. "Take your time," he said, glancing back at Alonso. "I'll be here." Alonso watched him go, the room once again falling into quiet stillness. For the first time in years, it wasn't just the beeping of the machine that filled the space. It was the silence of something unsaid, something that had been waiting to be acknowledged. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive Marcus, or if he even wanted to. But for the first time in a long time, Alonso felt like there was a glimmer of something in the darkness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was a chance. But whatever it was a start. The morning after Marcus left, Alonso woke to the sound of birds chirping just outside the window. The sun was beginning to rise, casting soft light across his mother's room. The peacefulness of the scene felt so distant from everything inside him, like he was living in two different worlds. On one side, there was the quiet, steady hum of his life with his mother. On the other, the chaos of emotions swirling around his father's return, his performance, and the weight of his responsibilities. His mother was still asleep, though her breathing had become even more labored. Alonso stood by her bedside, staring at her for a moment before gently brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. Her fragile face seemed so still, so far removed from the vibrant woman who had once filled their small apartment with laughter. He didn't want to lose her, not like this, not after all that had happened. His hand hovered over hers, but he couldn't bring himself to touch her yet. Instead, he turned his gaze to the window. The competition. The final round was only days away. That was what everyone was talking about now, the competition that had suddenly become so much more than a dream to him. It was supposed to be about music, about talent. But now, it felt like it was about his entire future. It felt like it could be the ticket out of this life he'd known for so long, if he could just push through, just keep going. But there was Marcus, still lingering in the background, waiting for Alonso to make a decision. Waiting for him to choose what kind of relationship they were going to have. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Alonso took a deep breath and turned to leave, knowing he needed some space, but also knowing that running from this wasn't going to fix anything. It was as if his entire life had become one big question mark, and he couldn't escape it, no matter where he turned. Later that afternoon, Alonso found himself walking through the park near his apartment. It was a quiet day, not too many people out, and a warm breeze rustled the leaves of the trees above. He needed to clear his head, but the more he walked, the more his mind raced. He thought about his mother, about her fight to stay alive. He thought about Marcus and the broken promises of the past. He thought about his performance, the way the crowd had reacted, the way Marcus had looked at him after. Alonso couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow let Marcus down, despite everything. There had been a look in his father's eyes, something like regret, something like longing. Alonso stopped by the park bench and sat down, rubbing his temples. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but the weight of everything was too much. His thoughts seemed to be pulling him in every direction, and it was hard to focus on anything for too long. And then he saw her. Cassidy. She was sitting on the edge of the fountain, her feet dangling just above the water, a sketchbook resting on her lap. She was the last person he expected to see here, but somehow, her presence felt like a small comfort in the middle of everything else that felt so uncertain. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked up when she noticed him approaching. Her face broke into a small, welcoming smile. "Hey, Alonso," she called out, her voice warm and familiar. "You okay?" Alonso shrugged as he approached her. "I'm getting there." Cassidy eyed him carefully, her gaze not quite judging, but searching. "What's really going on, though? You don't look like you're getting there. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." He sat down next to her, his hands fidgeting with the edges of his hoodie. "I don't know," he admitted, staring at the fountain in front of them. "It's like everything's happening at once. The competition, my mom, and then, him." He paused, swallowing hard. Marcus. My dad. I just don't know what to think anymore. What's even real? Cassidy didn't say anything for a moment. She just sat there, watching the water, letting the silence stretch between them. Alonzo could tell she was trying to choose her words carefully. I can't pretend to know what you're feeling, she said finally, but I know this much, you don't have to do it alone. I mean, look at what you're carrying right now. I can't imagine how hard it must be to juggle all of this, your mom's illness, the competition, and then the fact that your dad just showed up. It's a lot. Alonzo looked at her, surprised by her understanding. He hadn't expected anyone to get it, not really. But Cassidy seemed to see the weight he was carrying without him having to explain it. Thanks, he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't sure what else to say. Cassidy smiled at him gently, then glanced down at her sketchbook. You know, I think you've got something that a lot of people don't. You've got heart. You've got a reason to keep going. Even when it's hard. Even when it feels like everything's falling apart. Alonzo's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know how she did it, but somehow, Cassidy always seemed to know the right thing to say. Her words were like a lifeline, tugging him back from the edge. I just don't know if I'm strong enough, he confessed. I don't know if I can handle all of this. Cassidy turned to face him fully now, her expression serious. You don't have to do it alone, Alonzo. And it's okay to not have everything figured out. But whatever happens, I'm here for you. And so are your friends. And that has to count for something, right? He nodded slowly. Maybe she was right. Maybe it didn't all have to make sense. Maybe, just maybe, the only thing he could do was take it one step at a time. The rest of the day was a blur, but there was something lighter in Alonzo's heart. Cassidy's words stayed with him, a quiet reassurance that he didn't have to carry everything alone. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, whether he would ever fully reconcile with Marcus or find peace with his mother's illness, but for the first time in a while, he felt a flicker of hope. That evening, when he returned home, his mother was still asleep, her breathing slow and shallow. But Alonzo knew that he needed to face the reality of the situation. He couldn't keep running from the choices he had to make. He couldn't let fear and uncertainty hold him back. And he couldn't ignore Marcus any longer. Alonzo's mind churned as he sat at the edge of his mother's bed, the soft rhythm of her breathing almost hypnotic in the quiet of the room. He hadn't moved much since that morning, each hour stretching into the next like a weight hanging over him. His mother's condition was getting worse, and he could feel the sharp sting of time running out, yet there was something even more pressing in his mind. Marcus. His father. The quiet intensity of their last conversation gnawed at him, replaying in his head like a broken record. Marcus had said he was there to stay, that he wanted a chance to make things right. But Alonzo wasn't sure he could trust those words, not after everything. He had to decide whether he could open up to Marcus, whether he could allow the man who had abandoned him for so many years back into his life. Every time he thought about it, the same wave of anger, betrayal, and confusion washed over him. But tonight, something inside him snapped. He couldn't keep living in this limbo. He couldn't keep avoiding the one conversation that might finally bring him peace. Alonzo stood up abruptly and walked to the front door. He needed to do this. He needed to face the silence between them, the unspoken words that had built a wall between father and son for years. As he opened the door, the night air rushed in, cool and crisp, a reminder that the world continued to spin, indifferent to the struggles inside his home. It was well past dark when Alonzo arrived at Marcus's apartment, a small, nondescript building on the other side of town. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and the neighborhood felt unusually quiet, as though everyone had gone to bed, leaving only the ghosts of the past behind. Alonzo's heart raced as he stood at the foot of the steps leading up to the building, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Was he ready to hear what Marcus had to say? Was he ready to confront the years of unanswered questions? His hand shook slightly as he knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the still night. The door opened slowly, and Marcus stood in the doorway, his face softening when he saw who it was. "Alonso," Marcus said quietly, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. "I didn't expect you." "I need to talk to you," Alonso replied, his words firm, but the emotion behind them raw. "I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when it's not. I need answers." Marcus nodded slowly, stepping back to let him in. As Alonso crossed the threshold, the door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in the space between them and the rest of the world. The apartment was small, but neat, clean, even. It was strange to see it like this, compared to the chaos and disarray Alonso had grown up with. Marcus had clearly made a life for himself, a life that didn't include his son. Alonso took a deep breath and sat down on the couch, his body rigid with tension. Marcus sat across from him, eyes fixed on the floor, like he was waiting for the storm to hit. "You said you wanted a chance to make things right," Alonso started, his voice shaking with the weight of his words. "But I don't even know where to begin. I don't know if I can believe you. You've been gone for so long, and now you want to just walk back into my life like everything's fine. You think that's easy?" Marcus's face tightened, but his gaze remained steady. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I can't undo what's been done, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. I know it's not enough, but I'm trying. Trying." Alonso's voice broke, frustration bubbling over. "What does that even mean? You don't get to just show up and expect me to forget everything. You don't get to say you're trying after you left me and Mom to deal with everything on our own. You left me with no explanation, no apology, no reason." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, a flash of guilt crossing his face before he opened them again. "I know. I know it was wrong. And I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that I was lost. I was a mess. I wasn't in the right place to be a father. But that doesn't excuse leaving you. I should have been there for you, for both of you. And I regret every day that I wasn't." Alonso's chest tightened, and he stood up abruptly, pacing the small room. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about you being sorry. It's about everything we missed. It's about me wondering every single day why you didn't come back. Why you didn't try harder. Why you weren't there when I needed you most." There was a long silence as Marcus let the words sink in, and Alonso could feel the weight of the years between them. Years of hurt, years of silence, years of wondering where his father had gone. His thoughts were a storm now, overwhelming and uncontrollable. "Why now?" Alonso asked, his voice softer but still full of the confusion that plagued him. "Why show up now? After everything that's happened? Why not sooner? Why didn't you come back when we were struggling, when Mom was sick? When I was just a kid who needed a father?" Marcus took a deep breath and stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, as if choosing every word carefully. "I can't change the past, Alonso. I can't undo what I did. But I've spent every day of my life wishing I could. I'm here now because I realized I can't keep running. I'm here because I want to be the man you need. But I know I have to earn that. I know I have to prove it to you." Alonso felt a strange, unfamiliar heat in his chest, something like hope, but tinged with uncertainty. He didn't know if he could fully forgive Marcus for leaving him, for abandoning him and his mom when they needed him most. But there was something in his father's voice, in the sincerity of his words, that made Alonso wonder if it was possible. Could he let go of the past? Could he let Marcus back into his life? The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Alonso turned and looked out the window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. His mind was spinning with everything he had just heard, everything he had just said. Could he trust Marcus again? Could he let go of the years of hurt and disappointment? "I don't know if I can forgive you," Alonso said quietly, the words catching in his throat. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see what happens. But it's going to take time." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression somber but hopeful. I understand. And I'll wait, however long it takes. As Alonso walked back home that night, his heart felt both lighter and heavier. He hadn't gotten all the answers he wanted. He hadn't solved everything. But maybe, just maybe, he had started to make peace with it all. The days leading up to the final round of the competition were a blur for Alonso. Every moment seemed to be a balancing act, his mind constantly divided between his mother's declining health, the fragile new connection with Marcus, and the enormous weight of the stage ahead of him. The competition had started as a dream, a distant hope that one day, he might be able to leave behind the struggles of his life. But now, it felt more like a battle for survival, a way to prove that he could rise above everything, even when it seemed impossible. Each morning, Alonso would wake up to the sound of his mother's slow, labored breathing. The sight of her frailty was a constant reminder that time was slipping away. And as if the pressure of that wasn't enough, he was still grappling with his relationship with Marcus, who was trying to prove himself, but who Alonso couldn't yet fully trust. It was early on a Thursday when Marcus called. Hey, Alonso, Marcus's voice was warm but cautious, as if he wasn't sure how to approach the conversation. How's everything going with your mom? Is there anything I can do? Alonso's stomach twisted at the mention of his mother. He hadn't realized how much of the situation with Marcus had been pushed to the back of his mind. The truth was, he hadn't been able to think of much else except the looming final round and his mother's fight for life. But now, hearing Marcus's voice on the phone, that old pain flared up again, unbidden. She's not doing well, Alonso answered, the words tasting bitter as he spoke. The doctors say it's just a matter of time. We're just waiting. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Alonso knew Marcus was processing his words, struggling to find the right thing to say. He wasn't sure why it felt so hard to talk to Marcus about his mom. Maybe it was the fact that Marcus had never been around when it mattered most, or maybe it was the fear that no matter what, things wouldn't change. I'm sorry, Alonso, Marcus finally said, his voice heavy with regret. I know. I can't imagine what you're going through. But I want you to know, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. If you need to talk or if you need anything. Thanks, Alonso interrupted, not wanting to let the conversation go any deeper. He wasn't sure if he could talk to Marcus about his mother, about the fear, the helplessness, the anger that burned inside him. It felt like too much, and it was easier to push it down, to focus on the one thing that he could control, the competition. He had to keep going. He had to finish what he started. For his mom. For himself. I've gotta go, Alonso said quickly. But I'll see you tomorrow at the practice session. Alright, Marcus replied. We'll talk more then. Alonso hung up the phone, his thoughts spinning. He wasn't sure where things were headed with Marcus, or if they ever would be fully healed. But one thing was certain, he couldn't afford to dwell on it right now. He had to focus on what was in front of him. He had to keep moving forward. The next day, Alonso found himself sitting at the edge of the stage in the competition venue, his guitar in his hands. The audience hadn't arrived yet, but the room was filled with the familiar hum of anticipation. He could hear the soft sound of footsteps as other contestants rehearsed in the background, their nerves palpable in the air. But it didn't matter. The sound of the guitar strings, the familiar comfort of the instrument in his hands, was all that Alonso needed. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music take over. For a few fleeting seconds, the world outside seemed to fade away. There was no competition, no pressure, no illness. Just the music. He let his fingers dance over the strings, playing a melody that seemed to reflect the turmoil inside him. The song wasn't anything special, just a few chords strung together, but it was enough to settle his mind. Enough to ground him in the present, just for a moment. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door to the practice room. Alonso turned to find Cassidy standing in the doorway, a small smile on her face. Hey, how's it going? she asked, her tone light but full of concern. Good, Alonso replied, setting the guitar down beside him. Just, getting ready for tomorrow. You. Cassidy stepped into the room, taking a seat beside him on the edge of the stage. Same. But I know you've got a lot on your plate right now. With your mom and everything. Alonso nodded, the familiar lump rising in his throat. Yeah, it's hard to focus on anything else. Sometimes, I feel like I'm losing control of everything. I get it, Cassidy said, her voice softening. But I think you're doing better than you realize. I know it's not easy, but you've been handling it all. I've been watching you, and you're stronger than you think. Alonso looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her words. He hadn't realized how much Cassidy had been observing him, how much she had seen him struggling with his own emotions. For a brief moment, he felt a sense of warmth, of relief, knowing that someone saw him for who he was, not just the competitor or the son, but the person who was simply trying to survive. Thanks, Cassidy, he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. That means a lot to me. Cassidy smiled. Anytime. I just want you to know you don't have to do this alone. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of distant music filling the space around them. The quiet support from Cassidy was comforting, but Alonso couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something huge. Something that could change everything. The final round was tomorrow. And no matter what, he had to give it everything he had. That evening, Alonso returned home to find his mother asleep. She looked more fragile than ever, her chest rising and falling with the shallow breaths that were becoming increasingly labored. He stood at the door to her room for a moment, watching her sleep, his heart heavy with guilt. She had been everything to him, his protector, his guiding force. He had never asked for much, but he had always wanted her to be okay. But now, he wasn't sure if he could fix this. He wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. He sat down by her bedside, holding her hand as he whispered, I'm doing it, Mom. I'm going to make it through. I promise. But inside, Alonso wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. The final round was tomorrow. And he still didn't know if he was ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The day of the final round arrived, and Alonso woke up early, as he had every day since the competition began. But today felt different. His heart was heavier, the weight of it dragging him down. Today wasn't just about singing or playing for a win, it was about proving that, despite everything, he could still stand on his own. Despite the chaos of his life, the uncertainty that surrounded him, he had made it this far. Alonso stood at the window, watching the first light of morning break across the sky, casting long shadows across the street. His mind wasn't on the competition. It wasn't on the applause or the prize money or any of the things he'd once dreamed about. It was on his mother, whose condition had only worsened over the past few days. Her breathing was shallow now, each inhalation and exhalation a battle. He didn't know how much longer she could hold on. He had promised her that he would do this, for her. He had promised that he would give it everything he had. But he wasn't sure if he could. His body felt like it was made of lead, each step heavier than the last. But his mother had always told him to keep fighting, even when it felt like there was nothing left. So, despite the lump in his throat and the exhaustion in his bones, he had to push forward. He had to be the one to step up, to show that he could overcome it all. Alonso went into the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The shock of it made him gasp, but it didn't wake him up from the numbness inside. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. He looked different, older, maybe. The boy who had walked into this competition weeks ago seemed like a stranger now. He didn't recognize himself anymore. He quickly dressed and grabbed his guitar. The soft wood felt familiar in his hands, grounding him. But even as he played a few strums to steady his nerves, he couldn't help but wonder if it would be enough. The final round would be brutal. The judges were tough, and he had seen the competition's fierce talent up close. He wasn't sure if he could hold his own against the other performers, especially when his heart was so consumed by everything going on at home. By the time Alonso arrived at the venue, the place was buzzing with nervous energy. Contestants were milling around, each of them trying to calm their nerves, trying to find their center. But Alonso felt like he was drowning in his own head. His mind kept flashing to his mother's frail body, to the image of her sleeping in the hospital bed, barely conscious. Every step toward the stage felt like a journey to somewhere he wasn't sure he could return from. As he entered the backstage area, he saw Cassidy. She gave him a quick nod, her eyes full of concern but also a quiet strength. "You ready?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. Alonso could tell she was worried about him, but she wasn't pressing him for an answer. She understood. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." Cassidy placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "You've already done it, Alonso. Just go out there and do what you do best. Sing. Play. Don't think about anything else. I'm here. We're all here, rooting for you." Alonso nodded slowly, taking in her words. He knew she was right. The stage wasn't about his personal struggles. It was about the music. It was about finding a way to speak through the strings of his guitar, to let his voice carry the emotions he had bottled up for so long. The announcer's voice came over the loudspeaker, cutting through the chatter in the room. "Next up, we have Alonso King." His heart jumped. This was it. He stood up, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the wings of the stage, his guitar slung over his shoulder. He could hear the rustling of the audience, the buzz of anticipation. The lights were blinding, and the stage seemed impossibly big, as if it could swallow him whole. But he was here. He had made it this far. Alonso took his place in the center of the stage, his feet planted firmly on the ground. For a moment, he just stood there, soaking in the weight of the moment. The judges were in their seats, their eyes on him. The audience was silent, waiting. It felt like the whole world was watching him. He closed his eyes and strummed the first chord. The sound resonated through the room, filling the space with a quiet, trembling anticipation. The music started to flow through him, and for the first time in days, Alonso felt something close to peace. The song was one he had written himself. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. It spoke of love, loss, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. It was raw, vulnerable, and real. The lyrics were simple, but the emotion behind them was everything. It was all he had to give. The crowd remained silent as he played, the weight of the song hanging in the air like a shared secret. Alonso poured every ounce of himself into the music, letting it carry the hurt, the hope, and the exhaustion he felt deep inside. The song reached its climax, and for a brief, fleeting moment, he forgot everything else, his mother, his father, the pressure, the fear. There was only the music, and in that moment, it felt like the world made sense. As the final note echoed through the room, Alonso opened his eyes. He could hear the faint sound of applause trickling in from the audience, the warmth of it comforting but distant. His chest was tight, his hands shaking slightly as he placed the guitar down. The judges were silent, their expressions unreadable. His heart raced as he waited for their response. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that he had done it. He had stood up there and given everything he had, despite the fear and the uncertainty. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about surviving. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above the chaos of his life. As Alonso stepped off the stage, he met Cassidy backstage, who was waiting with a smile. "You were incredible," she said, her voice full of warmth and pride. "I don't know if it was enough," Alonso replied, his voice filled with uncertainty. But there was a flicker of something in his chest. A spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment that everything would start to change. Back at home that evening, Alonso found his mother awake, her eyes tired but still full of love. She smiled faintly as he walked into the room, sitting at her side. "How did it go, baby?" she asked, her voice raspy but full of pride. "I did it, Mom," Alonso said, his voice breaking. "I did it for you." She reached out a trembling hand, resting it on his. "I know you did," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Alonso squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, he had done it. He had fought, and he had made it through. And that, he realized, was enough. The morning after the final round was quiet, the kind of stillness that seemed almost unnatural. Alonso sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window, his mind still replaying the events of last night. The memory of his performance lingered in his mind, but it wasn't the applause or the judge's feedback that occupied his thoughts. It was his mother. Her weak smile from the night before was still vivid in his mind. She had been proud of him, and that pride felt like both a blessing and a heavy burden. His mother's health had continued to decline, but her words, their final exchange, stayed with him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in days, he felt a sense of peace. Alonso had done everything he could. He had fought, sung, and poured his soul into the competition. But no matter the outcome, it was the love he had for his mother that drove him forward. Now, he just had to wait for the results and see where this journey would lead. His phone buzzed on the table in front of him, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Cassidy. "Hey, are you okay? I know last night was a lot. Just wanted to check in." Alonso sighed, running his fingers through his hair. He hadn't been able to talk much to Cassidy after the competition. His emotions were still raw, and he didn't know how to process everything. She had been there for him every step of the way, and yet, there was still a part of him that felt like he was alone in this. But maybe it was time to let her in, to stop pushing everyone away. He quickly typed back, "I'm fine. Just, processing. Thanks for being there last night. It really meant a lot to me." His phone buzzed again almost immediately. "You did amazing, Alonso. I know you feel like it's not enough, but trust me, it is. Whatever happens next, you've already won." Alonso smiled faintly at the message. Cassidy had been right, he had already won. He had stepped out on that stage, with everything at stake, and he had given it his all. That was something no one could take from him. But as much as he appreciated Cassidy's support, the lingering uncertainty gnawed at him. What would happen next? Would he be able to keep his promise to his mother? Before he could respond, another message popped up. This one was from Marcus. "Hey man, just wanted to say you were incredible last night. I know things have been rough for you lately, but you should be proud of what you did. I'm here for you, no matter what happens next." Alonso stared at Marcus's message, his heart heavy. The last time he had spoken to Marcus, things had felt distant, uncertain. They had both been carrying their own burdens, and Alonso hadn't known how to bridge the gap between them. But now, seeing the sincerity in Marcus's words, he realized that he had never truly given Marcus a chance. Maybe it was time to change that. Maybe it was time to rebuild what they had once lost. He typed a quick response, "Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon." Alonso put the phone down and took a deep breath, his gaze wandering back out the window. The silence in the house was almost deafening now. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that a new chapter was beginning. He just wasn't sure what it was yet. Later that afternoon, Alonso arrived at the hospital to find his mother awake, her eyes open but distant. The doctors had told him she wasn't doing well, but they couldn't offer much more than that. He tried not to let the despair creep in. He had been trying so hard to hold it together, but he couldn't do it alone. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Hey, Mom. It's me," he said softly. "I just wanted to tell you how much I love you. And how much I'm going to keep fighting, for you. For us." Her fingers weakly squeezed his hand, and her eyes fluttered as if she was trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Alonzo leaned closer, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom," he whispered. "You've always been my strength. Now I'll be yours." A faint smile spread across her face, and in that moment, Alonzo realized just how much he had to lose. His mother had been his rock, his guiding star, and the thought of losing her terrified him. But he couldn't focus on the fear. He had to keep moving forward. For her. For himself. As the sun began to set, Alonzo made his way home, the weight of the day settling in his chest. He had no idea when the results of the competition would come in, but it didn't seem to matter anymore. For once, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about living in the moment, cherishing the love he had with his mother, and allowing himself the grace to let go of the past. When he got home, he found a voicemail waiting for him. It was from the competition organizers. "Hello, Alonzo. This is Sarah from the competition team. We've just finished reviewing your performance, and I wanted to let you know that you've made it to the final round. Congratulations." Alonzo's heart skipped a beat. His eyes widened as he listened to the message again, trying to process what he had just heard. He had made it to the final round. But something inside him had already shifted. Winning the competition, the prize money, it all seemed so insignificant now. What mattered more was the journey, the connections he had made, and the person he had become in the process. For a long moment, Alonzo stood there, the weight of the message hanging in the air. The past few weeks had been the most challenging of his life, but they had also been the most transformative. He had learned so much about himself, his strength, his resilience, his ability to keep going even when the world seemed to be falling apart around him. And now, with the competition still ahead, Alonzo felt a quiet sense of peace. He didn't need to win to prove anything to anyone. He had already proven the most important thing to himself, that he could rise above his circumstances and face whatever came next with his head held high. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner with his mother, Alonzo went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him, something bigger than the competition. He had been so focused on the outcome, on the performance, that he hadn't stopped to consider what was truly important. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. The next morning, as Alonzo woke to the sound of the birds outside his window, a quiet voice in his mind told him that no matter what happened next, he was ready. He was ready to face whatever came, to continue on this journey, and to carry his mother's love with him every step of the way. The next few days were a blur for Alonzo. His thoughts were fragmented, pulled between the competition, his mother's health, and the deep, unresolved questions swirling in his mind. The quiet moments he spent at his mother's bedside were filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional murmur from her. He was losing her, but he wasn't ready to let go. He couldn't be. Not yet. Alonzo had been visiting her every day, staying by her side, hoping against hope that some miracle would come. But deep down, he knew the truth. His mother was slipping away from him, and he couldn't stop it. It felt like a cold weight pressing on his chest, one that only seemed to grow heavier as the days went by. In the midst of all this, he received a call that he hadn't expected. "Alonzo? This is Sarah again from the competition," the voice on the other end said. "I have some exciting news. You've been chosen as one of the finalists for the grand prize. The judges were really impressed with your performance, and we'd like to offer you a chance to perform live at the final event." Alonzo's heart raced as Sarah continued talking, but her words began to blur together. He had made it to the final. This was it. The culmination of everything he had been working for. His eyes drifted over to the small picture of his mother on the bedside table. Would she be well enough to come to the event? Would he even have the strength to perform? Thank you, Alonso finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm honored. I'll be there. He hung up the phone, feeling an odd mix of excitement and dread. He had made it. But at what cost? His mind wandered back to the same question that had been plaguing him for weeks. What did he want to do with his life? Was singing really his path? Or was it just something he had clung to because it was a way out, a way to escape the hard truths of his life? Later that evening, Alonso found himself sitting in the small park near the hospital, the cool air brushing against his skin. The trees above him rustled in the evening breeze, and he could hear the distant hum of traffic, but it all felt so far away. He was alone, and yet, he wasn't. His thoughts circled around his mother, his music, the competition, and most of all, his father. There were times when he felt like he was standing at a crossroads, unsure which path to take. Every choice seemed like it came with a price, and no matter which way he turned, someone, was waiting for him. His mother had always been there to guide him, but now that she was so frail, so weak, he wasn't sure who to turn to. Just as Alonso was about to get up and head back to the hospital, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Cassidy. Alonso, I know things have been heavy, but I want you to know something. You've come so far. I believe in you. Whatever happens, don't lose sight of who you are. A lump formed in his throat as he read the message. Cassidy had been there for him from the beginning, offering support without ever asking for anything in return. She had shown him what it meant to trust someone again, and that had made all the difference in the world. He responded quickly, Thanks, Cassidy. I needed to hear that. I just feel like I'm stuck between two worlds. One's full of the past, and the other's full of uncertainty. I don't know where I belong. The reply came almost instantly. You belong where you're needed, Alonso. You're stronger than you think. And no matter what, you're not doing this alone. His heart swelled as he read her words, but the ache in his chest wouldn't go away. He needed to make a decision. It was time to confront his past, and more specifically, the man who had walked out of his life years ago, his father. The next day, Alonso made his way to his mother's hospital room. She was still unconscious, her body frail and unmoving, but her presence was still so strong in the room. He sat beside her once more, holding her hand, wishing there was something he could do. He hadn't seen his father since he was 5 years old. There had been no phone calls, no letters, not even a picture. His mother had never spoken much about him. Alonso often wondered if she had even loved the man who had walked out on them. But now, with his mother slipping away, he couldn't help but wonder, was there something he had missed? Was there a piece of his past that he was meant to find? His thoughts turned to the competition, and then to Marcus. The sudden idea hit him hard. What if the man he was searching for wasn't a stranger at all? What if he was closer than Alonso had ever realized? The thought consumed him. Could it be possible? Was Marcus his father? The next morning, Alonso found himself standing in front of Marcus's apartment building. His heart was racing in his chest, the anticipation almost unbearable. He hadn't spoken to Marcus in days, and the last conversation they had was awkward at best. But now, everything was different. If there was even a chance that Marcus was the one who had left his mother all those years ago, Alonso had to know. He stepped inside the building and rode the elevator to the top floor. His palms were clammy, his stomach twisted in knots. He couldn't deny the flood of emotions that washed over him, the hope, the fear, the uncertainty. When the elevator doors opened, Alonso walked down the hallway to Marcus's door. His hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a moment, he almost turned around. But something inside him wouldn't let him. He had to know the truth. He knocked, the sound echoing in the silence of the hallway. The door swung open to reveal Marcus, standing there with a look of surprise on his face. Alonso, he said, his voice soft. What's going on? I need to ask you something, Alonso said, his voice trembling. "And I need you to be honest with me. Are you my father?" Marcus's face went pale, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, Alonso felt the weight of everything he had carried for so long. The question that had haunted him for years was now hanging in the air, and he was about to get the answer. Marcus stepped back from the door, motioning for Alonso to come inside. "Come in," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Alonso stepped into Marcus's apartment, the cool air inside contrasting with the warmth of the hallway. His heart thudded in his chest, louder than ever before, as he followed Marcus inside. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but whatever it was, it felt like the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. His mind raced with questions, but the one that mattered the most was the one he had just asked. "Are you my father?" The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of years of longing and confusion. Marcus closed the door behind them and stood there for a moment, looking at Alonso as if trying to gauge whether he truly wanted the answer. Alonso's eyes locked on him, determination burning in his gaze. This was the moment that would change everything. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, looking weary, his face conflicted. He motioned to the couch. "Sit down, Alonso. We need to talk." Alonso sat, but he couldn't take his eyes off Marcus, waiting for the words he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. Marcus sat down opposite him, rubbing his temples before meeting Alonso's gaze. "I'm guessing your mother never told you about me," Marcus began, his voice low, almost apologetic. Alonso shook his head. "No," he said. "She never talked about you. I grew up with only her. But all these years, I've wondered, why? Why weren't you there?" Marcus sighed deeply, a look of regret flickering across his face. He seemed to gather his thoughts before continuing. "It's complicated," Marcus said, voice thick with emotion. "I was young when I met your mom. We were both struggling with our own things, different dreams, different paths. We had a brief relationship, and then, well, life happened. I wasn't ready to be a father. I made mistakes. Big ones." Alonso's chest tightened, and he had to stop himself from interrupting. He couldn't let his emotions get the best of him now, not when he was so close to the truth. "You left," Alonso said quietly, his voice laced with pain. "You walked out. Without a word. Without any explanation." Marcus shifted in his seat, his eyes closing briefly as if the memory was hard to bear. "I did. And I'm sorry. I didn't handle things the right way. I wasn't strong enough to face what was ahead of me. And when I left, I thought that would be the end of it. Why didn't you try to come back? Why didn't you ever contact me?" Alonso's voice cracked, the anger rising up despite his best efforts to keep it under control. "You just disappeared." "I was scared," Marcus said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was afraid of what it meant to be a father, afraid I wouldn't be good enough for you. I thought I could leave and get away from it all, but I was wrong. I should have been there for you. But I wasn't." Alonso looked down at his hands, trying to process everything Marcus had just said. The weight of the words pressed on him, and he found himself struggling to breathe. All these years, he had imagined what his father would be like, built up the idea of who he was, but now that the truth was in front of him, it didn't feel like the relief he had expected. Instead, it felt like a hollow ache. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Alonso said, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "All these years, I had to grow up without you. And now you're telling me it's because you were scared?" Marcus nodded, his eyes full of sorrow. "I get it. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want you to know that I never stopped thinking about you. I've always regretted the way things turned out." Alonso stood up, pacing the small apartment as his emotions swirled inside him. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to shout and tell Marcus how much pain he had caused, but part of him understood. Part of him knew that Marcus was speaking from a place of deep regret. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was right, he hadn't been there. He had made choices that led to the man standing before him now. "I don't know what to do with this," Alonso said finally, stopping in front of Marcus. "I've spent so many years resenting you, imagining that you were this villain in my life. But now, I don't even know who you are." Marcus's eyes softened, and he reached out, placing his hand on Alonso's shoulder. "I'm not asking you to just accept me, Alonso. I'm asking for a chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try to make things right. If you'll let me." Alonso looked at Marcus, searching his face for any sign of sincerity. For a long moment, there was only silence between them, the weight of years of absence and pain hanging over both of them. Then, slowly, Alonso nodded. "I don't know if I can trust you," Alonso said, his voice raw. "But I'm willing to try." Marcus's face broke into a small, relieved smile. "That's all I can ask for. We can take this one step at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just, let's try to build something new." Alonso felt a flicker of hope, a small light in the darkness that had surrounded him for so long. It wouldn't be easy. It couldn't be. There were too many years of hurt, too many things left unsaid. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. A new chance for both of them. As the weight of the conversation slowly began to settle, Alonso turned toward the door. "I need to get back to my mom," he said quietly. "She's in the hospital. She's not doing well." Marcus's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Alonso. If there's anything I can do, please let me know." Alonso nodded, walking toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to Marcus. "I'll think about what you said," he said, voice steady but not without emotion. "I'm just not ready to make any promises yet." Marcus nodded in understanding, and Alonso stepped out, the door clicking softly behind him. The air outside felt different, as though the conversation with Marcus had shifted something inside Alonso. It was a strange feeling, an unfamiliar sense of release, but also uncertainty. It was as if the world had just changed in ways he couldn't fully grasp yet. But one thing was clear, he wasn't the same person who had walked in a few hours ago. He had made peace with the fact that the past was something he couldn't change. And as for the future, that was still to be written. But he wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way he had been. Alonso drove to the hospital, his thoughts still reeling. His heart felt heavy, but there was a small flicker of hope there too. He wasn't sure what his relationship with Marcus would become, or if it would become anything at all. But for the first time, he felt like he had taken a step toward understanding. As he arrived at the hospital and walked down the sterile hallways toward his mother's room, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He wasn't just fighting for his own future anymore. He was fighting for the future of the family that had been fractured and broken, but not beyond repair. As he entered his mother's room, he took a deep breath. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, sitting by her side. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I promise you, I'll keep fighting. For you. For me. For us." The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. But Alonso, for the first time in what felt like forever, wasn't alone. The morning after the conversation with Marcus felt surreal to Alonso, as though everything had shifted ever so slightly, yet irrevocably. He walked through the world with a new weight, one that wasn't entirely bad, but it was heavy with uncertainty. He hadn't expected to find answers, but now that they were in front of him, he realized that the truth, while freeing, brought a whole new set of questions. Who was he now? What did this mean for his future, for his relationship with his mother, and even for the competition? It was early when he arrived at the hospital, the long corridor bathed in the soft light of dawn. He had spent the night tossing and turning, his mind racing over everything, his mother's condition, Marcus's confession, the competition, and even the possibility of an entirely new chapter of his life. But as he walked into his mother's room, all those thoughts faded into the background. She was the most important thing in his world right now. Her condition had remained unchanged, and the soft, rhythmic sound of the heart monitor was the only sign that she was still holding on. Alonzo sat by her side, taking her hand gently in his. Her skin was cool, her face pale, but there was still something about her presence that filled the room with a quiet strength. "I don't know if you can hear me, Mom," he said quietly, his voice filled with both tenderness and sorrow. "But I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to make sure I do right by you. By us." He paused, unsure of whether he should say the next part. He needed to speak it out loud, though. Maybe it would make it more real. "I saw him, Mom. I spoke to Marcus. He's my father. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. He said he made mistakes." The weight of those words hit him like a ton of bricks. He still wasn't sure what to make of it all. But hearing himself say it out loud, in that quiet hospital room, made it feel more solid. It was a part of the puzzle now. He wasn't sure where that puzzle would lead, but he knew one thing: he couldn't run from it. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze before standing up and walking to the window. The sky was a soft, pale blue, the sun just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the parking lot. He watched as the world outside slowly came to life, the hum of traffic and the distant chatter of pedestrians reminding him that life was moving forward, regardless of what was happening inside that hospital room. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting to see another message from Cassidy or Sarah, but it was from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Alonzo asked, his voice cautious. "Alonzo, it's Sarah from the competition," came the voice on the other end. "I hope you're doing okay. I wanted to reach out because we've had some updates on the event. We're getting closer to the final round, and we need to finalize the list of performers. I know you're going through a lot right now, but I just wanted to remind you that the competition is still on the table. The judges are eager to see you perform." Alonzo felt a knot form in his stomach. He had almost forgotten about the competition with everything that was happening. His mind was so preoccupied with his mother and Marcus, and the uncertainty of the future, that he hadn't even thought about his performance. But now that Sarah had brought it up, the weight of the decision hit him. "Right," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. "I'm still in the competition." "Yes, absolutely. The judges really liked your audition. This is an opportunity, Alonzo, and I think you have a real shot at winning. But I understand if you're feeling conflicted right now. Take your time to think it over, but let me know soon. We'll need your confirmation in the next 48 hours. Alonzo's mind raced. The competition was still a chance for him to make something of himself, to honor his mother's sacrifices, to prove that he was capable of more than just surviving. But did he have the energy for it? Could he truly give everything he had, knowing his mother's condition was so fragile? "I'll let you know soon, Sarah," he said, his voice sounding more composed than he felt. "Thanks for reaching out." After hanging up, Alonzo stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle in. What should he do? The competition was more than just a performance. It was his chance to change the trajectory of his life. But would it be worth it? Would his mother even be able to see it? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he called, turning toward the door. The door opened, and Cassidy stepped inside, her presence a welcome relief. She smiled warmly when she saw him, but her eyes quickly softened when she noticed the exhaustion in his face. "Hey, you okay?" Cassidy asked, walking over to him. Alonzo nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. "Yeah. Just, a lot going on, you know." Cassidy sat down next to him and looked at his mother for a moment, her expression sympathetic. "How's she doing?" "She's holding on," Alonzo said softly. "But I'm not sure how long it'll last." I feel like everything's happening at once, and I don't know what to do. Cassidy reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. You don't have to do this alone, Alonzo. I'm here for you. Whatever you decide, whatever path you take, I'm with you. Alonzo felt a lump form in his throat. Cassidy's support, her unwavering belief in him, was something he couldn't take for granted. He had always been alone in this struggle, always trying to figure things out by himself. But now, with her by his side, he felt like he wasn't as alone as he had once thought. I don't know what to do, Cass, he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. The competition, my mom. Marcus. I don't know where any of it fits together. I feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions. Cassidy smiled, her gaze steady and comforting. Maybe it doesn't have to fit together right now. Maybe you just need to take it one step at a time. Whatever happens with the competition, you don't have to do it alone. I'm here for you, Alonzo. And your mom, she knows how much you love her. You've done everything you can for her. He nodded, his chest tightening. I don't want to fail her. I want to make her proud. Cassidy gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. You already have. You're here, you're fighting for her, and you're doing your best. That's all you can do. Just take things one moment at a time. Alonzo took a deep breath, the weight in his chest easing just slightly. Cassidy was right. He couldn't solve everything at once. Maybe the key was to focus on the present, to be there for his mother, and then decide where to go from there. Thanks, Cass, he said, his voice full of gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you. Cassidy smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. You won't have to find out. As the two of them sat together in silence, Alonzo felt the first real sense of clarity he had had in days. He didn't have to have everything figured out. Not yet. He had time. And whatever the road ahead looked like, he wouldn't be walking it alone. Alonzo stood at the window of his mother's hospital room, the cool morning breeze gently pushing the curtains aside. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he stared at the city skyline, his thoughts as tangled as the web of light and shadow that danced across the streets below. The world outside seemed to move with a rhythm that was both foreign and distant from his own life, a world that kept turning while he was stuck in this limbo between what was and what could have been. His mother's breathing was steady but shallow, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor almost like a countdown. Every time the beeps grew louder and more pronounced, Alonzo felt his chest tighten, as if the sound was a reminder of how fragile everything was, how everything could be taken away in an instant. He glanced over at her, watching her sleep, her face pale but serene. He couldn't remember a time when she wasn't there, when her voice hadn't been the one to soothe his fears or lift his spirits. Now, it was as though the world was standing on the edge of a cliff, and he wasn't sure whether it would fall or stay suspended in the air. Mom, he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should keep going with the competition or stay here with you. I don't know if I'm strong enough for both. The words seemed to hang in the air, unanswered, but Alonzo wasn't expecting an answer. His mother had always been the strong one. She had always known what to do, even when the world was falling apart around them. She was the reason he had always kept going, always kept fighting for a better life. But now, with the competition looming and his mother's health in the balance, he didn't know how to reconcile these two parts of his life. What did it mean to pursue his dreams when the person who had supported those dreams, who had sacrificed so much for them, was slipping away? His phone buzzed again, and this time, Alonzo pulled it out of his pocket. It was a message from Sarah. Sarah, just wanted to remind you, Alonzo, that the final decision for the competition is coming up soon. You're an incredible talent, and we want you there. Don't forget, this is your chance to make it. Please let me know where you stand. The words felt like a weight on his chest. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, this is your chance to make it. He stared at the message for a long time, his fingers hovering over the screen. He could feel the pressure mounting, the tension between what he wanted for his future and what he owed to his mother. This wasn't just about a singing competition. It was about his future, his hopes, and his dream of breaking out of the cycle that had defined his life for so long. But it was also about his mother, the one who had raised him, loved him, and always been his rock. He didn't want to abandon her, but could he really just let this opportunity slip away? He turned back toward his mother, who was still sleeping peacefully. A part of him wanted to believe that she would wake up and everything would be okay, that she would smile at him, tell him everything would be fine, and encourage him to follow his dreams, just like she always had. But another part of him knew that things were different now. Nothing would be the same again. Alonzo took a deep breath and began to type a response to Sarah. Alonzo. I'm in. I'll be there. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. For a moment, he just stared at the phone, as if waiting for something to change. But nothing happened. The message had been sent, and now there was no turning back. A wave of emotions washed over him, but it wasn't relief. It was a mix of fear, sadness, and the bitter taste of guilt. How could he focus on the competition when his mother was fighting for her life? Could he really do both? Could he really be the son she needed and the man he wanted to become? He glanced at the clock. It was almost time for the final round of the competition, and the pressure of the ticking seconds felt more oppressive than ever. He had made a commitment to the competition, but in doing so, he felt like he was betraying the one person who had always believed in him. Alonzo leaned back in the chair beside his mother, closing his eyes for a moment. He let the silence settle around him, trying to ground himself. Mom, he whispered again, his voice cracking this time. Please wake up. I need you. It was the first time in years that he had admitted how badly he needed her. He had always been independent, always pushing forward, but now the weight of the world seemed too heavy to carry alone. The day passed in a blur, with moments of clarity interrupted by the heavy fog of uncertainty. Alonzo spent hours by his mother's side, talking to her, telling her about the competition, about Marcus, and about everything that had happened in the past few days. He didn't know if she could hear him, but it felt like the only thing he could do was speak his truth, even if it went unanswered. By late afternoon, Sarah had called again. Alonzo, her voice was bright, eager, but Alonzo couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at stake than just a performance. We're excited to see you at the final event. This is your moment. Are you ready? He paused, staring at the hospital bed. His mother's face remained unchanged, the machines around her a constant reminder of how fragile life could be. I'm ready, he said, his voice steady but hollow. I'll be there. The conversation ended quickly, and Alonzo hung up the phone, the weight of his decision settling in his chest. He had made it. He had committed to something that could change his life. But at what cost? Later that evening, when the shadows grew long, and the hospital room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the beeping machines, Alonzo's mother stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for the first time in days, Alonzo saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. His heart skipped a beat as he rushed to her side. Mom, he whispered urgently. Mom, you're awake. Her eyes flickered around the room, slowly focusing on him. Her lips parted, and though her voice was weak, it carried a weight of love and strength. Alonzo, she said softly, her voice raspy, I'm so proud of you. You've always been my fighter. Tears welled up in Alonzo's eyes. I don't know what to do, Mom. I've been fighting, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep going. Not without you. His mother smiled, her expression filled with a quiet wisdom. You are stronger than you think. You've always been. Don't let fear stop you. Go after your dreams, Alonzo. For both of us. Alonzo's throat tightened as he held her hand, his heart full of love and regret. He didn't know how much time he had left with her, but he knew one thing for sure, he wouldn't let fear hold him back. He would chase his dreams, not just for himself, but for her too. And so, with his mother's voice echoing in his heart, Alonso made a vow to himself. He would fight. He would sing. He would honor her, and in doing so, honor the road ahead. The day of the final competition arrived, and Alonso felt a storm of emotions brewing inside him. His mother had been resting more peacefully these past few days, but Alonso knew that things were still uncertain. He had spent the night beside her, talking softly to her, telling her about everything that had been happening, about Marcus, about the decision to continue with the competition, and about his overwhelming need to make her proud. But despite the quiet moments they shared, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind, an anxiety that gnawed at him. How could he focus on the competition when his mother was lying in a hospital bed, teetering on the edge between life and death? He stared at the mirror, fixing the collar of his shirt. It was the same shirt he had worn during the audition. A clean, sharp white shirt that seemed to have magical powers when it came to boosting his confidence. He had come so far since that day, had worked so hard to get here, but now, standing in front of the mirror, he wasn't sure if it was enough. The weight of his mother's condition loomed heavily over him. But there was no going back now. He had made a promise to himself, a promise to her. And no matter how much he wanted to crawl back into the comfort of the hospital room and hold her hand until the end, he knew that he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. It wasn't just about him, it was about proving that he was more than just a boy from a broken home. It was about showing the world, and himself, that he was capable of rising above the odds. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his head, then grabbed his jacket. As he turned to leave the room, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Cassidy. "Cassidy, hey, I'm with you in spirit today. You've got this, Alonso. Just remember who you're doing this for, your mom, yourself, and everyone who's ever believed in you." The words brought a lump to his throat. He had grown so accustomed to being alone in his struggles, but Cassidy had been there for him every step of the way. She believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. He quickly texted her back, "Thanks, Cass. I'll do my best." The event was being held at a massive venue, with lights that shone brightly and people bustling everywhere. Alonso couldn't help but feel small among the crowd, the magnitude of it all pressing down on him. It felt like a dream, like a world far removed from the hospital room and the reality of his mother's fragile health. Backstage, the air was thick with anticipation. Contestants were gathered in small groups, practicing their routines or pacing nervously, all of them waiting for their moment in the spotlight. Alonso took a seat in the corner, alone, his mind far from the stage and more focused on the quiet hum of the machines he had left behind at the hospital. Suddenly, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You okay, kid?" Alonso looked up to see Marcus standing in front of him, his posture casual, but there was an unmistakable sense of concern in his eyes. For a moment, Alonso just stared at him, unsure of how to react. His father, the man he had only just learned about, was standing there, an awkward stranger in a sea of familiar faces. "I'm fine," Alonso said quickly, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Just, trying to get my head straight." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "I know how it feels. This kind of thing can mess with your head. But whatever happens out there, just remember, you're not alone in this." Alonso glanced at him, a little surprised by the sincerity in his voice. It felt like too little too late, but it also felt like something he needed to hear. There was a long silence before Marcus spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other day," Marcus said. "And I want you to know. I'm here. If you ever need someone to talk to, or if you want to know more about, well, about anything, I'm not going anywhere." Alonso didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to yell at Marcus for not being there when he needed him most, for abandoning him and his mother all those years ago. But there was something else inside him, something soft, that told him that maybe, just maybe, this was a chance for something better. Maybe Marcus could be the father he needed, even now. "Thanks," Alonso said quietly, looking down at his hands. "I'll think about it." Before Marcus could respond, a stagehand appeared, calling everyone to take their places. The moment had come. Alonso walked to the side of the stage, his heart racing. He could hear the murmurs of the crowd, feel the weight of their expectations. But none of it mattered. His mind was only on one thing, his mother. He stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights blinding him for a moment as he adjusted to the intense spotlight. The audience was a blur of faces, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the music. All that mattered was this moment. He took a deep breath, then began to sing. The song was one his mother had always loved, one she had sung to him countless times when he was younger. It was a simple melody, but it carried a weight that Alonso could feel deep in his chest. He wasn't singing for the competition. He wasn't singing for the judges or the audience. He was singing for her. His voice, shaky at first, grew stronger with each note. His hands trembled, but his heart grew steadier. For those few moments, he wasn't just a boy from a broken home. He was a son, singing for the woman who had given him everything, who had taught him how to fight, how to love, how to survive. And as the final note echoed through the auditorium, Alonso stood there, breathless, heart pounding, waiting for the reaction. The silence in the air was thick, almost unbearable. But then, the applause came, louder and more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. He had done it. He had made it through. As he exited the stage, Alonso felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he would win the competition or if his mother would be there to see it. But he knew one thing for sure, he had given everything he had. And that was enough. The room backstage felt almost suffocating after Alonso's performance. The weight of the final note still echoed in his chest, the sound of the applause still ringing in his ears. Yet, despite the cheers and the congratulations from fellow contestants, something inside him remained restless, like a storm waiting to break. He had done it. He had given his all. But what came next? Would it all have been worth it? As Alonso walked off the stage, he was met with a flood of familiar faces, Sarah, the other contestants, and even a few of the stagehands who clapped him on the back. But his mind kept drifting back to the same place, his mother. Would she be awake by the time he got back to the hospital? Would she even know what he had done for her? Sarah caught up with him, her eyes bright with pride. "You were amazing, Alonso," she exclaimed, grabbing his arm. "That performance, it was everything we've been waiting for. I knew you had it in you." Alonso forced a smile, his heart not entirely in it. "Thanks," he said, though the words felt flat. "But I don't know if it matters. I just wanted to make sure I did this for my mom, you know." Sarah's face softened, and she nodded. "I get it. And I'm sure she's proud of you, no matter what." Alonso didn't say anything in response. He didn't know if he could believe that right now. He had done this for her, but what if it wasn't enough? What if the competition didn't change anything? What if she didn't wake up, or worse, what if this whole journey led to nothing? His thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. "Alonso," said Marcus, his presence unexpected yet oddly comforting. Alonso turned to face him. It was the first time Marcus had approached him since the rehearsal, and his father's gaze was serious, but there was something unspoken in the air between them. Something that had shifted since their brief conversation earlier. Alonso didn't know how to respond, there was so much anger still buried inside him, but the vulnerability that Marcus had shown earlier gave him pause. "Marcus," Alonso said, his voice cold but not unkind. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to say, you did a great job out there," Marcus replied, his tone sincere. "And I know things between us have been complicated. But I think you should know something." Alonso's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Marcus shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the words he was about to say. "I think it's time for you to know the truth. The whole truth." Alonso blinked, confusion clouding his expression. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Alonzo, there's something I've been keeping from you. Something I should have told you a long time ago, but I didn't know how. It's about your mother." A cold chill ran through Alonzo's body. He wasn't sure if he wanted to hear this. Whatever it was, it felt like it would shatter the fragile sense of control he had just managed to gain over his emotions. "My mom?" Alonzo repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus nodded solemnly. "Your mother and I, we were together when we were young. We had you, but things fell apart. I didn't just leave you, Alonzo. I was forced to. There was more going on than you could have understood back then. I couldn't protect her. And I couldn't protect you." Alonzo's mind raced, but he couldn't seem to process what Marcus was saying. His father? Forced to leave? The whole truth? His world tilted on its axis, and he struggled to make sense of the words that hung in the air. "What do you mean?" Alonzo demanded. "What are you saying? If you cared so much, why didn't you fight for us? Why didn't you come back? Why weren't you there when I needed you?" Marcus's face twisted with regret, and for the first time, Alonzo saw the vulnerability that had always been hidden behind his father's stoic exterior. "I didn't come back because I didn't think I had the right. I made a mistake, Alonzo. And that mistake hurt your mother, and it hurt you. The truth is, I couldn't stay. But it's not because I didn't want to. It's because..." He stopped himself, the weight of the confession too much to continue in that moment. Alonzo stood there, his pulse pounding in his ears. The rush of emotions inside him was dizzying, conflicting. On one hand, a part of him wanted to believe Marcus. He had always wanted a father, someone to share his life with, to understand him. But the anger, the abandonment, the years of silence, could that all just be explained away with a confession? "No," Alonzo finally said, shaking his head. "I don't know what you think this is, but it doesn't change anything. You weren't there. You can't just show up now and expect things to be okay." Marcus stepped closer, his expression pleading. "I know it's too late, but I need you to know that I've thought about you every day. And I've regretted what happened. Your mother, she never wanted you to feel abandoned, but I know now that's exactly what you felt. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. If you'll let me." Alonzo felt his emotions swelling up inside him. His throat tightened as he struggled to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to scream at Marcus for everything that had gone wrong, for all the years of emptiness. But there was something else, something softer, something that pulled him toward the possibility of forgiveness. "I don't know what to say," Alonzo admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus's eyes softened. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Alonzo swallowed hard, looking at his father with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Was this what he had been waiting for all along? The chance to finally understand the man who had left him behind? Could he really open that door, or would it just lead to more hurt? The tension between them was palpable, but before Alonzo could respond, Sarah's voice cut through the silence. "Alonzo, they're calling you back for the results," she said, her face filled with excitement, though she quickly registered the somber mood between them. "Are you okay?" Alonzo nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was. "Yeah. I'm okay. I'll be right there." He turned toward Marcus one last time before heading to the stage. The weight of everything, the competition, the revelation, his mother, settled heavily on his shoulders. His heart was a mixture of hope and pain, both of which seemed impossible to reconcile. But he knew one thing for sure, whatever happened next, it would change everything. The air was thick with anticipation as Alonzo stepped back onto the stage, the applause still reverberating in his ears. But it wasn't the applause that weighed on his mind anymore. It was the revelation that had just shaken him to his core. His father, the man who had left him and his mother all those years ago, was here. And he had just told Alonso everything. He had told him that he didn't leave out of choice, that there were reasons beyond what Alonso had known. But Alonso couldn't just shake off the years of abandonment. Could he really allow himself to forgive Marcus? Could he open up to the possibility of having a father figure in his life again after all the years of loneliness? Or would the wound of the past remain too deep to heal? Alonso felt a deep knot in his stomach as he made his way to the center of the stage. The spotlight was blinding, the noise from the audience distant yet ever present. It was surreal, like he was in a dream, watching everything happen to someone else. His heart was torn between two worlds, the one where he could finally have the answers he had longed for, and the one where he was still just a boy, fighting for his mother's survival, fighting for his own future. And as the host of the competition called the contestants forward to announce the results, Alonso's thoughts raced. Would this moment define him? Was he here because of his talent or because he was simply in the right place at the right time? The host took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he held up the envelope containing the results. The lights dimmed for a moment, amplifying the tension in the air. And the winner of this year's singing competition is... Alonso's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe he was standing here, in this moment, when so much else was going on. He barely heard the host's next words, the name echoing in his head. It wasn't the award that mattered, it was the decision that loomed on the horizon. Alonso Brown. The audience erupted into applause, and Alonso blinked, momentarily disoriented. His name had just been called. He had won. But as he walked forward to accept the trophy, the weight of the moment felt different. The congratulations from the host, the cheers from the crowd, they all seemed distant, muted in comparison to the storm raging inside him. He took the trophy, the cold metal of it weighing heavily in his hands. It should have been a moment of celebration, but all Alonso could think about was his mother. Could she hear the applause? Was she even awake? And then there was Marcus. The man who was supposed to be his father, who had been absent from his life for so long. Could Alonso really accept him after everything? The host handed him the microphone, and Alonso stood there, frozen for a moment as the crowd continued to cheer. He had no idea what to say. How could he possibly speak in this moment, knowing the complexity of his emotions? The crowd grew silent, waiting for him to speak. He glanced down at the trophy, his fingers still wrapped around it. Then, finally, he cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone, his voice shaky but steady. I don't know what to say, he began, his eyes scanning the crowd, trying to make sense of everything. This isn't just about me. It's about my mom, who taught me everything I know. And it's about the people who believe in me, who have supported me through thick and thin. The crowd was quiet now, hanging on his every word. Alonso's heart was racing, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he had control over something. He wasn't just the kid from a broken home anymore. He was someone who had made it this far, despite the odds. I also want to thank someone who just recently came into my life. My dad, Alonso said, his voice steady now, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The word father still felt foreign on his tongue. He's here tonight. And even though I've been angry for a long time, I'm learning that it's never too late to make things right. There was a pause in the crowd, an unsure murmur as they processed what Alonso had just said. Was he talking about the same Marcus that everyone had seen around the venue? His father? Alonso looked up at Marcus, standing in the back of the room, his eyes locked on Alonso with a mixture of hope and guilt. Marcus gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the moment, but he didn't approach. It wasn't time for that, not yet. I know I've got a long way to go, Alonso continued, his voice stronger now. But I'm ready. I'm ready to see what the future holds. The applause was deafening now. The crowd had caught on to the gravity of his words, their cheers a mixture of encouragement and surprise. It felt strange, this sudden outpouring of support, as though the entire room had just become his family. But Alonso wasn't done. He wasn't just here for the applause. His mother was still waiting for him, and so was Marcus. He had made it this far, but the real journey had only just begun. Most importantly, I want to dedicate this to my mom, Alonso said, his voice breaking slightly. She's the reason I'm here. I hope wherever she is right now, she knows that I did this for her. She's everything to me. The room fell into a hushed silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Alonso looked toward the exit, feeling like he was at a crossroads, like he was standing between two worlds, one where he had finally won something, and one where his mother's health and his future hung in the balance. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all." And with that, Alonso stepped off the stage. He didn't know what was coming next. He didn't know if the future was going to be bright or dark. But for the first time in a long while, Alonso felt like he had a choice. As the night wore on, the competition ended, and Alonso's life took a new turn. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like his to shape. The music, the love, the hope, everything had come together in that moment. His story wasn't over, but it had found its first real chapter. And as Alonso made his way back to the hospital, trophy in hand, he didn't know if his mom would be awake, but he knew he had made her proud. And maybe, just maybe, he could finally start to forgive Marcus. The choice was his now. And he was ready to face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?